Hi everyone, today we're going to do a very technical object that is based on a real-world object and on a CAD file I downloaded from a website called vk.com. I'll post a link to that site in the video description, and this site is like a wall where people keep posting free CAD files that you can download, and you can get all sorts of formats there. Many of the files come in a DXF format, which is a CAD file. You can also get CDR files, which is CorelDRAW, and SVG files, for example. And because people keep posting stuff, the object we'll be doing will probably be quite a way down that list, so you'll have to scroll down and try and find that. However, you don't need to do that because I'm providing the files that we need for this tutorial, which basically is one reference image and an Adobe Illustrator file. So anyway, the file I downloaded from vk.com was a DXF file. And I cannot open DXF files in Release 18 Broadcast. Maybe you can open it in the studio version of Cinema 4D, I'm not sure. But in any case, I could not open this file in Broadcast. So what I did was I loaded the DXF file in a free 2D application called Inkscape. And I could save this DXF file out from Inkscape as an SVG file. And then I could load that SVG file in Adobe Illustrator, and that enabled me to save it out as an Adobe Illustrator file, and I used the Adobe Illustrator 8 format because you can open it in Cinema 4D. And this is the file that we're going to start with. So please check the video description. I've also provided a download link to that project file, and it's not really a project file, it's just the Adobe Illustrator file, and I'll also include the reference image we'll be using for this tutorial. And what we'll be doing is this object here. So this is the reference image that will be included in the download. And I'm not sure what it's supposed to be. It's some sort of frame structure that apparently is made of wood. And what I did was I created this object here. So this is one of the renders of my final object, and for my version I extruded the splines from the Illustrator file, and then I remodeled everything trying to create proper topology. We're not going to do that in this video because A, it would take too long, and B, the splines actually provide more flexibility. We have a lot of these round areas here, and you can set the splines to be higher resolution or lower resolution depending on what you need. So we're only going to work with the splines. We're not going to create a polygon version of this object like I did here. And I've made another render here, and this is what the exploded view looks like. So these are all the parts of this frame structure. So let's get started and open the Adobe Illustrator file, or rather import it in Cinema 4D, and then we can work on that file to get our final splines and create that structure. Once you've downloaded the Adobe Illustrator file that I prepared for you, you can either drag and drop it into the viewport from the Windows Explorer, or you can go to File, Merge, navigate to the folder where you stored the Adobe Illustrator file, and just double click to open it. And we're going to open it with the default settings. The scale is 1 centimeter, and I have checked Connect Splines. You can uncheck that or check it. In this case, it doesn't make any difference. I wish it would make a difference because we will get a ton of splines and we'll have to do a little bit of work to turn these into usable splines. So I'll keep this checked, but it won't do any good in this particular case. So hit OK, and you can't really see anything because the splines got imported somewhere up here. You can see this blue arrow. If I click on that, my camera will center on the splines, and you can see we have a ton of splines here, and we only need a few of those because this object has a lot of pieces that are repeated over and over again. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll clean up our scene and we will delete everything that we don't need. And I'll do this in the front view by hitting S on the keyboard. If you have the null object selected, you will jump right to the center of the splines. And I'm going to deselect it and then use my rectangle selection tool and select this part here. We can delete that. So I'm just cleaning up a few things before I start copying the splines that I need. And the first one we'll need is this one. And if I select this, you can see we have 15 objects selected. I'm just going to hit Ctrl X and then Ctrl V to cut and paste these splines. And then I'm going to right click and use Connect Objects and Delete to turn this into a single spline. And I'm going to hide it. Let's delete a few of these objects. That's just so I don't copy them accidentally. The next part that we'll need is this one, and you can see we have a couple of those, but we only need one of these. So I'm going to select these splines, cut them and paste them, and then connect them into a single spline. And we can delete all of these ones. And then we have these octagon shapes here. We need both of them. They are basically the same, but there's a couple of differences here. For example, on this one we have those diagonal rectangular openings, and we don't have these on this octagon shape. Instead, we have a couple of holes that we don't have on this one. So for now we're going to cut and paste and connect both of these. And as for the rest of the object, we will need this part here. So I'm going to again cut and paste these splines and connect them. And let's continue with this small one here. And if I select this, you can see everything gets selected. And that's because of this little dot here, which represents the null object that we imported. So what I'll do is I'll just select these splines and then deselect that little dot. And now we only have this spline selected. And I'm going to cut it and paste it and connect all of these splines. Let's hide this and then select these splines here. And we also need this part down here. And I'll just delete these small circles here. And then it should be easier to select this part here. And we don't need any of the other splines here except for this shape here. So I'm just going to delete everything but not the null object. And then just cut and paste these splines and also connect them into a single object. So when we're done, we should have 10 objects left, and we can delete this frame null object. And what I'll do right away is I will name these objects. Now let's have a look at this one. If you go to, or if I go to the picture viewer, I have my reference image here. The spline that I've selected is this part here, and I'm going to call this center clamp. Basically, we only have two sections on this object. One is the center sections with the clamps and these plates here, and then we have those arms, and we have 4 of those around the object. So I'm going to name the splines accordingly. Let's have a look at the next one. This is the arm. And this one, let's have another look at the reference image. This one is that piece in between the two arm pieces. So I'm going to call this one arm center plate, maybe. And this one here is, it's a bit difficult to see, it's this bottom piece here. So this one will be the arm bottom plate. Oh, I'm not sure. I think this is, because this looks similar to this one, but I think this is not the bottom plate. Let's have another look. It's this plate in between, not the bottom one. So this actually is the arm bottom plate. And let's call this one middle plate. I'm not sure if that's a proper English name, but at least we can tell the pieces apart. And this one, I'm selecting it and hitting S on the keyboard. And let's have another look at the reference image, what this one might be. This you can't really see that clearly in the image. It's the walls on the center structure, I think. So I'm going to call this center wall. And this one, if you take a look at the reference image again, it is not the top plate, because this top plate doesn't have those diagonal openings. So it has to be this bottom plate here. So I'm going to rename this to center bottom octagon plate. And this is the center top octagon plate. And I think I misspelled this one here. And this one is pretty obvious. It's the top plate of the arm. So I'm going to rename it to arm top plate. And we have one more piece, and this one is the bottom of the center structure. So this will be the center bottom plate. And now that we've named everything, we're going to do a little more work, because although the splines appear to be a single objects, they're not actually a single spline. So we're going to have to do some more work to turn them into proper splines. And what we need to do to turn these into proper splines is we need to weld a lot of points. If I switch to point mode here, and I have my rectangle selection tool selected, and only visible elements is switched off. If I select one of these points here, you can see it's actually 2 points. Unfortunately, I cannot deselect everything and optimize the spline. That won't work. If I select this point, it's still 2 points. So what we need to do is use the weld tool and then left click anywhere in the viewport, and this will turn these 2 points into a single point. So I'll select all the points, and if I hit the space bar, I can go back to the weld tool, left click to weld these points, space bar, select the next point or the next 2 points, space bar, and weld them. And I'll quickly go around the object and do that. And once you've welded the points, you will get this gap because the spline is not yet closed. And this one up here, as soon as we've welded these points down here, this will automatically turn into a single point. And the splines that are open, we don't need to fix those. It means that all the points are actually just one point and not 2 points. So now we can actually close that spline and it's a proper spline. I'm going to hide this for a second. I'm not going to do all of these in this video, that would be pretty boring. But I do want to give you some hints because some of these splines are a bit tricky. For example, the center clamp. If I select it, hit S on the keyboard to center the object here, you can see the spline appears closed. But like before, if I select a point, it's actually 2 points. I'm going to weld these. And I'll just do this quickly for all of the points on the outside here. And you can also see that it's not a single spline because the color keeps changing. A spline starts white and ends blue. And whenever we weld some points, the color will change a little bit. Meaning it will turn this into a proper spline that goes from white all the way to blue. Now the problem with this one is, did I get all the points? I'm not sure. Because we should get one section that is actually open. I'm just going to select each of these points again. We have 4 here, that's fine. We have 4 here. So apparently I forgot to weld them, or I've just tried it again. You can't weld them for some reason. So what we need to do here is, I'm grabbing my live selection tool because it is set to only select visible elements by default, and I'll select one of these points and delete them. So now we only have 1 point here. We still have 2 points here. Let's see if we can weld them now. No, we still can't weld them. So I'm going to use the live selection tool again and delete this point. And in this case that was not very useful because the wrong points got connected. I'll just try and join these 2 segments, which didn't do anything. I'll just go back and delete this point first. We're still getting the same issue. I'll just make a cut here. Select this point and disconnect it, and then I can select it. It's actually 3 points now. Delete these points, and now we should be able to select these 2 and join that segment. And also we can probably close this spline now. But there's still something wrong, because you can see if I uncheck close splines, we get an open circle here, but the other ones are actually still closed. So that means we still have overlapping points on these. So we have only 1 point here, but we have 2 here. Let's try and weld them. Let's select them again. And that didn't work. I'm going to deselect everything. Use a selection tool that has only select visible elements switched on, and I'm going to delete this point here. Let's just check the other ones. So this is just 1 point, this is 2 points. Let's try and weld these. And this is another thing that happens. If you can weld 2 points, you get something like this. And this is easy to fix. You can right click and select equal tangent length, and that will fix that spline. So I'll do this for the rest of these circles as well. Now we have the same issue on all of these. We cannot weld these points, so I'm just going to select one and delete it, and I will weld these 2 and use equal tangent lengths to fix the shape. And it's probably the same here, so I'll just delete this point, weld these 2, use equal tangent length. Should have selected only one point here. Then weld these two, use equal tangent length. And now we have a proper spline, and I can now close this spline, and you can see we have the same issue with the tangents on these areas here. So I'll just, maybe I can select all of these at the same time and use equal tangent length, and now this shape is fixed. So your job will be to go through the rest of the splines. I fixed the center clamp and the center plate. So you'll still have to do the same work for all of the other splines. And I'm going to pause the video now and come back when I've finished cleaning up the splines, and then we can continue and start creating our frame structure. So I'm back and I have fixed all of my splines so that they are proper splines, and I've saved them as a separate file and called the file splines fixed. And before we start assembling the components, and we'll start with the arm, there is one more thing I would like to point out, because you may or may not know how to fix that. There was one other spline that provided some problems, and that was the arm. I'm going to switch everything off except for the arm, and I think that is the fixed one. So I'll switch on that copy I made, and this is the original spline. And there's a couple of things. Now, one thing is that we have 2 points that are very close together here. And of course you can choose to keep them. I chose to get rid of them. And in order to fix that spline, I would do what I told you in the previous video, which is weld the points. And this one I'm going to delete. And in order to close that gap, you can select both of these points and then use join segments. And then you can just continue welding the points on this one. And we have this issue on a couple of these shapes, and you can solve them exactly in the way that I just showed you. The second issue is that we have 2 points here and we only really need one. And of course you can again choose to keep that point. I chose to delete it. But how do we get that shape back? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We can make a copy and use that as a reference, and on the original I'm going to delete that point, and that of course changes the shape. But I can select these 2 points and then grab my spline pen tool, and I can tweak the tangents until I get that shape back. And I'll just do this quickly. Okay, and when you're done, you can delete the copy and continue working on the original by welding the points. I'm going to delete this because I already have my arm fixed. And once you're done, you can select all the splines, and we can use close spline to close all of these. And now let's go back to model mode. I still have all of my splines selected, and I'm going to use axis center. And I'm going to center the axis on all of these splines. And we can use the default settings, just hit execute. And now the splines, or the object axis, has been centered on each of these splines. And I'll keep these selected, because now I can go to character commands, reset position scale rotation, and this will move all of my splines to the center of the Cinema 4D grid. And now we can start assembling the components, and I'll start with the arm. So I'm going to select all of the splines that belong to the arm and drag them down here, and I'll switch off all of the other splines. And I'll select everything except the arm itself, and I'm going to rotate these pieces around -90 degrees, and then I'm going to reset the object axis to 0. And I'll move these over. to the side. And the arm I'm going to rotate 90 degrees this way, and again reset the axis. So now we can put the pieces together, and maybe we'll start with the bottom plate. It doesn't really matter, but I think it's easy to see how to do it using the bottom plate, so we're going to start with this one. So let's select the bottom plate here, and I'll just move it over a bit. And before, I need to switch off the object axis, of course. And in order to place this, we need to change the position of the object axis. So switch on snapping, switch on enable axis, and what we're going to need later is spline snap as well. So I'm going to switch that on as well. We don't need it right away, but like I said, we're going to need it a little bit later. And then I'm going to place the object axis on this point here. Now we can switch off enable axis, and I can zoom into this hole here, grab my move tool, and I don't even need to see the other object. I can just left click in the viewport and drag it and snap it to this point here. So now we can see we have placed it in this opening here. And you can also see that the opening is not matching up with this extrusion here. So what I'll do to fix that is I'll select these 4 points here, then go to my side view, hit S on the keyboard, or O to frame the object here, and then I can move these points over and snap them to the other side of that hole here. And we need to do the same thing here, so let's select these points and snap them over to here. And before I continue adding the next plate, I'm going to make a copy of the arm. And I'll go back to model mode, switch on enable axis, activate the move tool, and I'm going to place the axis here. Then I can switch off the axis and just move this arm over and snap it over to here. So now we have something that is symmetrical. And I'm going to select both the arm and the bottom plate and hit Alt G to place these in a null object. And for this null object, I'm going to reset the axis. So let's bring up axis center, and this time we need to check include children and use all objects. And I'm going to move the axis all the way to the bottom. And if you want to, you can also drag it over a bit to where it makes sense. So I'll just put it over here. It's not really important right now. And now that we've got this, we can use commands reset PSR again to put this at the center. And this will just make it easier later on to place and clone these objects. I'm going to switch off the, let's rename these. This is the right arm. And this is the left arm. And I'm going to switch off the left arm for now. Next we need to place the object that goes into these holes here, and that is the center plate, I think. No, it's not this one. It's the middle plate. It's this one. So I'm going to move this over. And again, I'm going to move the object axis. I'll put it to here and then go to my top view and move the axis back. And for this we need spline snapping. And I'm going to move the axis over and snap it to the end of the spline. And in order to be able to do this, we need spline snapping, which I have switched on just a couple of minutes ago. And now we can zoom in to this hole here And again, use the move tool and snap the object to this corner here. And like before, we need to make adjustments to the position of some of the points here. So on this one, I'm going to select these points, and we need to move these over and snap them to here. Same here at the front, select these 2 points, and I'll just snap them over to here. So let's continue with, not with the center plate, this is the most difficult one. I'll just do the top plate first. Again, the first thing I'll do is I'll move the object axis, and I'll move it to here, and then go to the top view and move the axis back and snap it to the end of the spline. And this piece needs to go in here. And like before, we need to make this a perfect fit by moving some of the points around. And we also need to move these points here. And by the way, the area with that round hole and the 4 small holes needs to be at the front of the arm. If you take a look at the reference image, you can see this in here. So now I need to select these points here and snap them. And we also need to change the position of these ones. And these ones. And I want to make this flush with the arm here at the front. So in the top view, I'm going to select the points here and just move them forward and snap them to the arm. And let's switch on the left arm, select the points or the point on the other side and snap it to here. So now we have a seamless fit here. And the last object we need to place is the center plate. And like before, first of all, we need to move the object axis. I'm going to put it here. And this plate needs to go into this opening here. So let's move it and snap it to here. And we need to snap it to the other arm. I'm just going to switch on the left one again. So it needs to go in here. And you can see the points are a little bit off, it seems. And also, right now this plate is going straight forward, but it needs to go up at an angle here. So let's go to the side view. And I'm going to use axis extension to rotate this plate into place. And we need snapping for that, which is already switched on. I also need the rotate tool. And now I can hold down the control key, right click on the blue circle, drag it over, snap it to the front of the spline, and then left click and drag it up and snap it to the bottom of this opening here. And that will align this plate with the openings here. And it seems I did something wrong. It looks like I accidentally made a copy of this. I'll just switch that off. Actually, let's just get rid of that. So you can see this is now lined up, but we still have to move some points around here. As you can see, these are not lining up. We can just select them, go back to the side view, and just move them and snap them into place. And then select these points. And move them over a bit. Same here. And we also need to move these 2 points here at the front. So that is the arm assembly. Next we're going to put together the center structure. Before I continue and assemble the center part, I'm going to clean up my arm section a little bit. I'm going to drag all of these objects out of the null object, go to model mode, and I'll just make sure that the axis is centered on all of these objects for now. So let's bring up axis center. And this time I'm just going to select each object and I'm going to put it at the center using the default settings of axis center. Okay. And then I'm going to select all of them and put them in a new null object. And I'll call this arm. And we can delete this one for now. And let's take care of the center part. I'm going to switch off the arm and switch everything else on. And I'm going to select the octagon plates and rotate them 90 degrees. And I'm going to reset the axis. I'm going to move everything else over to here for now. And we need to rotate this around some more. And what we need to do is, I'll start with the bottom plate maybe. If I go to the top view and center this, basically we need these small extrusions facing the axes of the Cinema 4D grid. So I'm going to rotate this around 45 degrees or minus 45 degrees and then reset the axis. And on this one we need to do the same thing. Let me just undo that. Before we rotate these plates around, we're going to assemble the bottom part of the center portion. And I'm hoping this is facing the right way. No, actually it's not. We do need to rotate these around because the bottom wall goes in these openings here. So I will rotate these 45 degrees. Sorry about that. Things are getting a little bit more complicated now. So I'll just reset the axis on this one. And we need to rotate this one around as well. Again, minus 45 degrees. And let's reset the axis to 0. Okay, I'm going to hide this. And we're going to start with the center bottom plate, which is, if you take a look at the reference image, it's this one. And then we're going to put the sidewalls in there, and next is the bottom octagon plate, and then we'll add the clamps and the top octagon plate. And again, we're going to do this like the arms. We're going to extrude everything later, either outside to the outside or down. And that's also important in order to be able to fit everything together later when we start extruding the individual splines. So I'll start with the center bottom plate. I'll move this over and rotate it 90 degrees this way and 90 degrees this way. And I'm going to reset the axis. And we need to put the center wall in there. And again, I forgot to switch off enable axis before I move the object. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move the object axis to this point. And snap the object to this point here. And you can see there is again a mismatch for the opening and the extrusion here. So we need to select these points, go to the top view, and I'm going to snap them to here. And for now, I'm only going to snap the bottom points. This is where the bottom octagon plate goes, and we may have to adjust these points differently. And over here, I need to move these points over and snap them to here. So we're getting a perfect fit here. And before I make a copy and move that over to the other side, I'm going to add the bottom octagon plate, and then we'll see what adjustments we need to make. So let's see. On this one, I'm going to place the object axis here, and I'll snap it to the top point here. Because remember, we're going to extrude everything down and to the outside. And this looks good. Now let's see if we need to adjust the points, and we do. So I'm going to select the center wall and select these points, go to the top view and move them over and snap them to here. And I'll select these points and snap them to here. So now we can make a copy of the center wall. And this one is, well, let's call it center wall right, and this is the center wall left. And I'm going to take the center wall right and I'll move it over and snap it to this point here. So we can extrude this to the outside. So we have these three pieces fitting together. Now one thing that I've found is that the model is slightly inaccurate. We'll have to adjust the openings or the dimensions of the openings at the top, but we're going to do that later. So for now this is fine. And what we can do now is we can snap the clamp to this small extrusion here. So let's select the clamp and I'll rotate it around 90 degrees like so, and let's reset the axis to 0. And if you take another look at the reference image, we have this extrusion or this cutout here at the top that doesn't do anything, and then we have two more at the bottom, and one needs to fit to the top octagon plate and the bottom one needs to fit to the bottom octagon plate. So since this is the bottom octagon plate, I'm going to place the object axis here at the top, and I will move it to this position here. And again, that is so we can extrude this plate down. And next we need to place the top octagon plate. So let's switch that on, and I'll switch everything else off except for the clamp, and I'm going to snap the top octagon plate to the clamp. And here we need to move the axis to this point here and then snap to this point here. So again, we can extrude this top plate down and the clamp over. So let's switch on everything else again. And before I do anything else, I'm going to use axis center, and I'm going to center the axis on all of these objects. Okay, that's not looking too bad. And now we can try and fit the arm assembly to the center assembly. And in order to make that easier, we're going to rotate this entire center assembly 45 degrees. So let's select all of these objects. I'm going to put them in a null object, and I'll call this the center assembly. And let's call this arm assembly. And I'm going to move the object axis for the center assembly to 0 on all of the axes. Actually, it seems like I didn't move the bottom plate to the center of the Cinema 4D grid. So I'll just use axis center again and use include children and all objects, and I'll move it down. And then use character commands, reset PSR to move the entire structure over to the center. And then I'm going to rotate this 45 degrees. And I'll just reset the axis. Because what that means is we have the areas where the arms need to go in facing in the direction of the grid, which will make it easier to position everything. I'm going to move this over a little bit. First of all, switch off the axis or enable axis. And I will do a quick test first with one of the arms. So let's make a copy of the right arm. I'll switch the entire assembly off again. And on the center assembly, I'll just drag out the, I guess it doesn't really matter which one. I'll just drag out the bottom octagon plate and make the rest invisible, so things are just a little easier to see. Now we need to place this arm on this plate, and what we need to do here is select the right arm, switch on the axis, and I'll move it to this point here. And then in the right view, I'm going to move the axis over to the end of the object. And something just moved. I just want to make sure that the object axis is placed correctly. And now we can move this arm and place it here. Because again, we need to be able to extrude this plate down. And we also need to be able to extrude this arm to the outside. So that's why I'm placing it here. And now let's have a look at the points. And you can see we have a mismatch again, and I want this to be a perfect fit. Now, before I do anything else, I want to make sure that these openings on the octagon plate are consistent. So what I'll do is I'll switch the arm off for now, and I'll just reset the axis on this one, and then go to point mode. Let's go to the top view, and I'm going to select one of these holes and check the width and the length. And then I'm going to check this one, and we do have a slight mismatch here. So on the z-axis we're fine, but this is a little different, not much, but a little bit. And if I select these ones here, these are 13, this was 13. And this, well, actually the ones at the center are the same, mostly 13, but this was different, wasn't it? This was 14. So let's change this to 13. That's only one of these openings that we need to change a little bit. And let's check these ones as well. So this one again is 14. This is 12, 12, and what did we have here? 13. So we changed everything to 13. So I'll just copy that, and I'm going to make these holes consistent, because we need to rotate the arm construction around, and all of these holes need to have the same length. And once we've adjusted the length of these openings, we will have to adjust some points on the arm, and then we'll be fine. So let's see, I'll change all of these to this number here. And let's just check the number for the Z position on this one. So it's 236, and what we got here, 236. So that seems to be consistent. Okay, now I'm going to switch that off and drag out the top plate. And all of these holes need to have the same dimensions again. And you can see these are different. That's because the axis is not at the center. And also it seems that the entire object is not at the center. And we'll fix that a little bit later. So for now, I'm just going to reset the axis. And these are 13, that's the number that we want. This is 14, so I'm going to change it. Change this one. That's okay. And we need to make the same changes over here. And these should be fine. 13 and 13. Now let's check these ones. And we need to change these. And I'm also going to put this to 0 on the X and Z axes. And I'll do the same thing with the center bottom plate, because I do want them at the center of the grid. And let's see, I'll just drag out the center bottom plate. Oh, and it's rotated this way, 45 degrees. So I'll just put that back to 0. I'll center the axis and just move it to 0 and 0 here, and then rotate it again 45 degrees. And let's check the center clamp. Is this one still in position? No, it isn't. I'll just snap this to here. I need to move the object axis first, so let's move it to here. And then snap it to this point. Let's check the top view again. Okay, so that's fine. Center wall left and right, we need to move these as well. So I'll switch off everything except for the bottom plate and the two walls. Yeah, and unfortunately I've already moved the object axis, so I just need to do that again. So let's move the object axis to here, and then just snap this to here. And on this one, I'm going to move the axis to here, and then snap the object to here. So everything, I hope, is now where it should be. Okay, and that is looking fine. And the right arm needs to be moved a little bit. So let's select it, and I'll move it and snap it to here. I'll switch off everything else again because it's a little bit confusing to see what's going on. Let's check this in the side view. Yes, we seem to be doing fine. Now the only thing we need to change is the position of some of these points. And we should be able to select all 4 of these and go to the top view and just move these over and snap them to here. And you can see the holes of the octagon plates are not quite consistent, and neither is the position of the center circles. So let's see if we can fix that. I just try and select these points, select the connected points, and then move it all to 0, but I don't think that's going to work, to be honest. Oh, it is actually. So now they are consistent. And I do want to make these holes consistent as well. Let's see if we can select both of these, and let's just scale everything down to 0. And once we've done that, we may need to adjust the points on the arm again. I'll continue with the horizontal ones, and then I'll do the vertical ones. Bit of a nasty surprise, to be honest. I wasn't expecting that. So we'll have to do the same thing for the vertical ones. So let's check the arm again. We also need to snap it again. And as you can see, that also means we need to snap those points again. So these points for this extrusion look fine. We just need to move these ones here. Okay. So I'm going to switch on all the pieces for the center. And I'll put these in a null object again. And I'll create a new one. Rename this to center assembly. And I'll just delete this one because it's empty and we're not going to need it anymore. Now we've adjusted this arm a little bit. I don't want to have to do this again for the ones in the arm assembly. So what I'll do instead is, if I switch that assembly back on, I'm going to make this a child of the right arm first. And then I'm going to use character commands reset PSR, which wasn't very helpful, but I really don't want to do this again on the two arms in the assembly. And I think I already know what the mistake was. We just need to reset the axis on this one. And then we should actually be able to make it a child of the right arm, and then use reset PSR. And I'm going to make a copy and make that a child of the left arm. And I'm going to reset the position, scale and rotation again. So this is our new arm left. Let's drag this out and delete this one. And this is our new arm right, and I'm going to delete the old one. So the only thing we need to do is we need to move this assembly and place it on our center assembly here. And for that I'm going to select the arm assembly, and I'm going to, well, try and place the object axis, but I can't do it in the usual way. So we'll just have to move it manually, and we need to snap it to here. And we also need to move it over to here, and we need to move it back to here. I'm really hoping this works. So now we should be able to move the entire assembly and snap it to this point here. So let's just check. So we can extrude these arms to the outside, and the plates can be extruded down. And same over here, we can extrude this arm outside or to the outside. So that is looking good. I'll take a quick break, and when I come back we're going to extrude everything and put the entire assembly together. The first thing I want to extrude is the arm assembly. However, there's a few adjustments we need to make before we can extrude the geometry. One issue I found when I checked the model is that this arm over here is not lining up with this opening on the plate, so we need to move it. And this is the left arm, I think. I'm going to switch that to solo mode. And I'm going to move the axis to here, and then I'm going to move it over to the back of the spline. And now I can move this over and snap it to this opening. So now it's fitting inside this opening, but moving the arm a little bit means that all of the plates on the arm are not fitting to this arm anymore, so we need to change those. I'm going to select the bottom, middle, let's move this, center and top plates, and let's go to point mode. And what we need to do is select all the points over here but only the ones on the outside. And I'm going to move the axis all the way to here and then snap them to the arm. And on the other side everything seems fine. And another issue I found is that the extrusions on those plates of the arm are not all exactly the same. So I'm going to change that too. And I'll start with the bottom plate. And we already have these points here selected. And we've already moved the z-axis to the back. And you can see the width down here. I'm going to change that to 6. Select the next one and change the width to 6. And well, we'll do that for all of these plates. And of course, we need to do this on the other side as well. I'm going to select these, select the points on the other side, and then again scale these one by one. Now this time we need to move the axis over to here. So let's change that to 6. On all of these plates. Okay, so that's fine. Now when we extrude, the arms should be flush with the extrusions of the plates. But changing the width of these extrusions to 6 means that we're not getting a perfect fit on those plates, because the extrusions or the holes need to have a width of 6 as well, so we can fit the arms inside these openings. So let's go ahead and I'll switch everything off except for the 2 octagon plates. And let's go to a point mode. We already are in point mode. I'm going to select both of these splines. And then what I'll do is I'll select one point on each of these openings here, and then go to, where is it, select, and select connected. And we need to scale these points, and we need to do this one spline at a time, because you can see I can't do anything down here, it's grayed out. So I'm going to select the bottom spline, and we need to change the axis and move it all the way over on the x-axis, and then change the size to 6. And we need to scale from the inside to the outside, because the arm spline is fitting to this point here, and we need to extrude it this way. So I'll scale these to 6. Select the other spline and do the same thing here. Next I'm going to select both splines, deselect everything, and now we're going to do the same thing for these openings here. Again, select connected, and then move the axis over all the way to 100%. Select the first spline, change the size to 6, and select this one and change the size to 6 as well. And now we need to do the same thing for the horizontal openings. And this time, let me just move the axis back. This time we need to move the z-axis all the way back. And then change the size to 6. Again, select the connected points on these openings. Move the z-axis over to 100%, and let's scale these points to 6. So that's all we need to do for now on the center assembly. And I think we can now start extruding the arm assembly. And I'll start with the right arm. Let's put it in an extrude object, and we need to extrude this 6 centimeters, and this arm we need to extrude -6 centimeters. And we have another issue here, that is I do, hopefully you don't. When I fixed these splines, apparently I made a couple of mistakes. So over here we need a cutout, and something's wrong because we have a line here, and also down here we need to get rid of this one. So what I'll do here is I'll select the right arm and I'll just switch that to solo mode. And what I'll do to fix that is I'll make a cut here, and then I'm going to select the point that I've just created and disconnect it. Select it again, and you can see we now have 6 points. I'm just going to delete those. And something I think is still wrong with this spline. If I try and close it, we're still getting this line here. That means we have more than one point. What I mean is we have overlapping points somewhere here. So I'll just check these. And we have 2 points here. I'm just going to weld these, and that seems to have fixed the issue. If I close that spline, it looks alright now. If I extrude it, it looks fine. Now we have this cutout here, and we need to do the same thing for the left arm. I'm going to switch that to viewport solo single. And I'll make a cut here, disconnect this point, select again. You can see again we have 6 points. I'm going to delete those and just weld these 2 points. Close the spline, and that fixes that. I'll just rename the extrude objects so we can tell things apart. So that is the 2 parts of the arm, the 2 side parts. Next I'm going to extrude the top plate. Let's go from top to center to middle to bottom. And in order to be able to extrude these, we must first find out by which amount we need to extrude these. So I'm going to select one of the arms, go to point mode, and select the points up here. Let me just switch off that extrude. So this has a height of 6 point something. Now in this case I'm not going to bother putting all of this to even numbers. I'm just going to copy that. Then select the center plate and extrude it up by that amount. Oh, I should have extruded the top plate, sorry. So I'm going to extrude the top plate up by that amount. And you can see we seem to be getting a perfect fit. And if you see more than one black line here, something's a bit off. You can try and fix it if you want to, or maybe you don't want to be that accurate, and that's fine too. I'll just try and do it as accurately as possible. But it's going to be a little bit tedious, and it's going to get complicated, maybe, depending on what issues we find. So that is the top plate. Next, I'm going to extrude the center plate, and again I'm going to select the right arm, select these points here. Actually, I'm only going to select these 2, and then copy this number for the height. Let's put this in an extrude object, extrude this up by this amount. And that seems to be fine as well. Next, we're going to extrude the middle plate by this amount. And that seems to be fine as well. And the last one is the bottom plate, and we can extrude this by the same amount that we extruded the middle plate. So let's put this in an extrude object, extrude it up. Oh, looks like I do need to copy this number again. And that seems to be fine as well. So I can switch on the other arm, or the extrude object for the other arm. And everything seems to be lining up nicely here. And there's one more thing I want to do here. On the top plate I'm going to move the points at the front back a little bit. So let's select the top plate. Just select the 2 points at the front. I just reset the axes for now. And I'll just move these back a bit. So something like this looks fine. And hopefully we won't need to make any more changes to the arm assembly. And I'm going to switch that off. And let's take care of the center assembly. And I'll start at the bottom and I'll make some changes here too. Let's see, let's rearrange these. This is the top octagon plate, the bottom octagon plate, the center bottom plate, and I'll leave the clamp there. And we have the walls and the bottom plate at the bottom, so that's good. I want to make everything a little more consistent, so if I select these 2 points, you can see these are not 6 centimeters, which is the amount by which we extruded the arms. And I want to change these openings to 6 centimeters as well. So I'll go to Viewport, Solo Single, and I'll select these points here, move the Z-axis back, and scale those to 6 from the inside to the outside. And then I'll select these points here, move the axis over, and I'll scale these to 6 as well. Now for the walls, I want to do the same thing. So what I'll do here is I'll select the bottom points. I'll move the axis up and then scale these to 6. And I'll do the same thing for the top points, and I'm not going to move the y-axis down, because if I scale from the bottom up, it means that when we extrude, the geometry will stick through the bottom octagon plate. So I'll scale these down from the top 6 centimeters. And I'll just do the same thing for the other wall. And because we're going to extrude these walls 6 centimeters, that means that the openings into which these walls must fit on the bottom octagon plate also have to be 6 centimeters. So I'm going to switch that to Viewport Solo Single. And what we need to change is these openings here. Now on this one, the axis is not where it should be, and I think the easiest way to make these openings the width that we need is just to rotate the object. So I'm going to rotate this 45 degrees. Then I'll reset the axis to 0. Go to point mode. And now I can select these points here, select the connected points, move the x-axis over, because in this case we need to scale from the inside to the outside, and then we'll change the width to 6 centimeters. And then I'm going to select these openings here, move the axis over, and scale these openings down to 6 centimeters. And I'm going to rotate this back minus 45 degrees. And I'll reset the axis again. And now let's start extruding. and see how things turn out. We'll start with the center bottom plate, and we need to extrude this down -6 centimeters, and then I'll just rename this. Let's continue with the left wall, and we need to extrude these, or this wall, 6 centimeters, and you can see this is fitting perfectly. I'll rename this and extrude the other wall, and here we need to do -6 centimeters. And that's a perfect fit as well. So I'm going to rename that. And I'm going to extrude the, maybe I'll move this up to the top, the bottom octagon plate next. And we need to extrude this down 6 centimeters. And when I add the extrude object, I get a lot of weird geometry here. And that means something is wrong with that spline. I'm just going to undo and switch that to solo mode. And I probably just forgot to weld some points when I created clean versions of those splines, so I'll just have to check everything here. Fine here, fine here. Now over here we have 2 points. I'll try and weld them, which isn't working. So I'll just select 1 point and delete it. And now we only have 1 point left here. We have 2 points here as well. Try to weld these, and that seemed to have worked. Okay, everything else seems to be fine, and I'll just check that center circle just in case. But that seems to be fine as well. Let's put this in an extrude object. And this is looking fine. I'll extrude this down -6. And this is looking very good as well. So I'll rename that and continue with the top octagon plate. And we can extrude this down right away. And apparently there's issues with this spline as well. So I'll just try and fix that by checking the points here. Now we have 2 points here. I'll try and weld these. It's not working, so I'm going to select 1 point and delete it. And I've just welded these 2 points. And let's check that center spline, or that circle at the center. And we have 2 points here. I'll just weld these and use equal tangent length. And we have 2 points here as well. I'll just weld those and again use equal tangent length to fix the shape. And let's try and extrude it and see if that's working. And it is, so I'm going to extrude this down -6. Switch off viewport solo. And that means we only need to extrude the clamp. I just select these 2 points, and these are about 4 centimeters on the x-axis. I'll try and extrude the clamp by that amount and hope that it will work. It's not really working. Let me undo that. We also need to make sure that the height of these points is 6 centimeters, because that's the amount by which we extruded that octagon plate down, and it's a little more than 6 centimeters. So I'm going to move the axis up on the y-axis and scale these points to 6 centimeters, and let's switch that to solo mode for a second. We also need to scale these points to 6. So let's see what we can do about this extrusion. I think to keep things simple, I'll just try and adjust the offset until we're getting a match here. And it seems that 5.6 is doing the trick. So I think I'll just leave it at that. Let's go ahead and rename that, and in order to be able to see anything, in order to be able to see the details that we've added, we need to add bevels, and that means we need to add fillet caps to all of the extrude objects here. I'll also switch on ambient occlusion. And let's go to the caps tab. I'm going to switch both of these to fillet caps. And the offset is a bit big. I'll bring that down to 1. And we also need to switch on constrain here, because right now the objects have gotten bigger. We don't want that. And we need to reduce the offset a little bit, and maybe let's add 1 or 2 steps. And I think that's looking good. Okay, that's looking fine. Now what we can do is we can clone that center clamp, because we need one of these on each side. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just add a null object, and I'll make the center clamp a child of that null object. And I'll rename that and put it in a cloner. And we need to switch that to radial, change the plane to X, Y, and the radius to 0. And we only need 4 copies. And I'll switch the display to constant shading lines. Select the cloner, go to the transform tab, and use the color picker, and I'll click anywhere on the top plate to change the clamps to the same color. And I'll also rename the cloner. So that is the center assembly. Let's switch on the arm assembly. Select the extrude objects. I didn't name this one. Let's go ahead and do that. So select all the extrude objects. We also need to add fillet caps here. Let's do 0.5 again. And add 1 or 2 steps. Let's see how that looks. It's weird, I'm not seeing any detail here. I wonder why that is. What's it like on the other side? It's probably the same. And the reason why we're not seeing anything is because we need to switch on constrain for the extrude objects. So that is looking a little bit better. I'm going to reset the object axis of this null object to 0 on all the axes. And now we can put this in a cloner. And again, I'll switch that to radial, change the plane to XZ. We need 4 copies and no radius. And again, I'm going to change the color like this. So that is the arm assembly. And then I'm going to create another null object. And I'll move it to the bottom of one of the arms. And I don't think I can, I can snap it to one of the clones. And let's just move it back to 0 on the x-axis. And now we can move this up on the floor. But first of all, we should make everything else a child of that null object. So now we can move it up on the floor. And let's rename that to frame structure. And that's it. That is our finished frame structure. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you again soon.